Lyndon grew restless. After high school, his parents tried to talk him into college, but he was having none of it. He went to California looking for work, and not finding it, hitchhiked back to Texas, broke. Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess Connell, and if you're new, then welcome. I would love to earn your subscription. I don't take it lightly that you guys spend time with me reading old magazines, reading books to learn about the Kennedys and other topics. I appreciate that you spend time with me doing this and even going into the comments to discuss it more. I love that. So I really do appreciate it, and I hope that it is an earned subscription if you choose to subscribe. Today we are going through a Life magazine that came out roughly 3 weeks after President Kennedy's assassination in 1963. It is the first full look at LBJ in his presidency. We did get a look at President Johnson and the first mentions of him in the November 29th, 1963 Life magazine, which would have been just 2 weeks prior to this one. But this one has President Johnson at his White House desk, December 13th, 1963. That is what we are going to go through today. When I open up the magazine, the editor's note says, this week, a John F. Kennedy Memorial Edition. We have gone through this one, so you'll want to check that out. It says, after putting to press our last two issues, one on the assassination of the president, the other of his funeral in Washington, we have been deluged with letters. Phone calls have flooded our switchboards, and many reached us at home. Most of the letters and calls told us that our issues were appreciated. A few told us that it was shocking to publish photographs of the actual assassination. Many others asked us for reprints of the issues and complained that they could not obtain them. In fact, as the hours then the days went by, the requests for reprints increased to proportions that for us were unprecedented. So they put together this memorial edition. Very special. Well, the next editorial is called The Lethargic 88th versus LBJ. Since we are focused on LBJ, I will read some of this to see if it's something we want to read all of. It says, the energetic and decisive way President Johnson has taken charge of his office imparts his own self-confidence to the country. But one of the great hopes invested in him may, we fear, be disappointed through no fault of his own. This is the hope that he can exert more influence over Congress than did Kennedy, whose 1963 legislative proposals were all but hopelessly stalled. Can Johnson, who was once the virtual boss of Congress, get action from it? If not, why not? The thing to remember is that the 88th Congress before the assassination had sat longer than any peacetime Congress in memory, while accomplishing practically nothing. It was feebly led, wedded to its own lethargy, and impervious to criticism. It could not even pass routine appropriations bills. It was a scandal of drift and inefficiency. The murder of Kennedy, it was briefly thought, would make enough congressmen ashamed of their record to give his successor the support Kennedy had been denied. Johnson is the first outstanding modern congressional leader to become president. And as president, he has lost no time in seeking to revive his old contacts and authority. Instead of the cool distance that had developed between Kennedy and Congress, imperfectly bridged by Larry O'Brien phone calls, Johnson sees the leaders daily and phones many other members himself. This is Lyndon. His first speech as president was a great success with Congress, especially his promise to respect their independence and the integrity of the legislative branch. After sounding out Harry Byrd on the possibility of getting action on the tax bill by bypassing his committee, he learned this precipitate maneuver would offend the traditionalists and abandoned it. Nevertheless, he is bringing unprecedented pressure for the petition to discharge the Civil Rights Bill from Judge Smith's House Rules Committee. He wants these measures not just because Kennedy did, but because he said, we have talked long enough. Yes, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a huge piece of legislation and he was getting it through. But whom does he mean by we? One trouble is that Lyndon Johnson is no longer entitled to use that word in talking to Congress. The very legislative prerogatives he respects set a distance between the president, whoever fills it, and the lawmakers, however well disposed. Johnson may push harder and more skillfully for action than Kennedy did, but ours is still a system of divided and mutually checking powers. Yes, or is supposed to be. The 88th is especially tender of this division. It is the same Congress that gave these same bills the lethargy treatment for almost a year. As for the shock effect of the assassination, Senator Javits put it well. The public is in a mood to be galvanized, but Congress is not. Judge Smith, the segregationist czar of the Rules Committee, still refuses to clear the Civil Rights Bill because of what he calls, quote, the present state of hysteria. So Judge Smith, who was for segregation and keeping this Civil Rights Act from passing out of committee, is pointing to, like, because Kennedy died, it's all a state of hysteria. So we shouldn't pass a bill just because of that. By this, he can only mean that the White House, the Negroes, labor, and the liberals are all demanding a vote on it. Congress is reluctant to bypass Judge Smith because of its respect for its own hoary rules and seniority rights. So he says, it goes down after talking about the tax bill, and it says, this scandal has put our whole system of parliamentary democracy in question. A few conscientious congressmen realize this and want to do something about it. Senators Case and Clark have introduced a resolution for the study and basic reform of Congress's archaic rules, committee structures, precedents, and other machinery, which were inadequately changed in 1946 and have not been touched since. Such a study would at least give Congress a chance to turn itself from a living statue show into a businesslike organ of popular government. The civil rights and tax bills can perhaps be blasted toward a vote by popular pressure. Parenthetically, it adds, why not write your congressman? But equal pressure is needed for the resolution. If political shockwaves of recent days won't bring Congress to life, don't blame the new president. Not even Lyndon Johnson can pass that kind of miracle. Okay, so that's the introduction. Everybody's mourning JFK, and they're giving a sort of pass to LBJ that Congress is not going along with him. There are, of course, Christmas advertisements. This one is a Revlon advertisement. There are Christmas advertisements throughout because this is early December. It's always fascinating to me to see these old advertisements. This one has a whole set of General Electric gifts that you could use, from mixers to vacuums, automatic toothbrushes, hair dryers, shampoo polisher for your floor. Wow. And an automatic blanket. Lots of gift ideas for Christmas. I hope you'll indulge me. I'm going to read some of these letters to the editor about JFK's assassination. It says, Sirs, the life issue on Kennedy is an extraordinarily outstanding issue. The article by Theodore White is the most moving tribute I have seen for President Kennedy. Despite my deep shock and bereavement over this terrible event, I wish to congratulate you. That's signed Alden Hoffman, a colonel, and he's from San Francisco, California. Sirs, your issue symbolized and portrayed the feelings of the entire world. From the mourning banded cover through the final and the most human pictures of the president, a reader experienced a series of emotional changes from shock, anger, and sadness to national pride. You have placed the man and the symbol in proper respect. We who are training for Peace Corps duty deeply felt the loss of our founder. We sincerely pray that his death will spur all of us to greater fulfillment of his goals. That's by Charles Patrone, Peace Corps trainee. Others talk about keeping the issue as a memento for their children. A life reader for 26 years, I found this edition not only the most interesting issue you ever published, it is far more than this, an unforgettable document of our time, worthy of being preserved for our children and grandchildren. Interesting. And then it says, according to Radio and Television, Life magazine has or is contemplating the purchase of the life story of Lee Oswald. any magazine that would pay money for a biography of a murderer of our beloved president is not having me as a reader from this day. The editors say the rumor was incorrect, totally unfounded, in fact. Though Life interviewed members of Oswald's family, it made no payment to them of any kind. Sirs, I was ashamed to learn of your payment to Abraham Zapruder for the exclusive rights of the film of assassination. Then I heard of his charitable actions, and he merits my applause. They note Mr. Zapruder, who took the films, gave $25,000 of his payment to the family of J.D. Tippit, the policeman Oswald killed. So those are some of the editorial remarks. Very interesting to see in real time the way that rumors and assumptions were invading even the ways that readers were interacting with the magazine itself, but also each issue of the magazine. Well, this one, the very first article says, "The Texan sits tall in a new saddle." There is the spread. Here in the front, it says, "The Johnson Manor, seated in his own rocker with a dietetic orange drink before him, the president has an easygoing talk with Defense Secretary McNamara on the defense budget." The title says, "Lyndon Johnson, Man, Roots, Family, Thrust." The nation last week watched with fascination as Lyndon Johnson, whom it had never really known well, imposed his own personal style on the U.S. government. The new president, as his childhood snapshots show, and they're at right, so we'll look at those in just a moment, has his deepest roots in that kind of rural America where folks are frugal, work hard, and transact business on a basis of man to man. So here are these boyhood photos. It says, "The Johnson Boyhood. These snapshots, borrowed from albums of family and friends, show young Lyndon growing up on the Texas ranch. At 3, at left, he rode bareback, piggyback on a hog, and later felt brave enough to try a horse above. He also rode a steer to a corn mill 5 miles from home." Wow, that's pretty impressive. For anyone of that time period to have photos of their boyhood that are that particular is very fun. It does emphasize his background. It says, "This background was reflected in Johnson's every act. In informal huddles at the White House like the one above, he talked from early morning until late at night with administration and congressional leaders, getting advice on every topic, from civil rights to taxes, and shoring up an expert team to help him continue the Kennedy program." So that's the framing that they're giving it, is he is just continuing the actions of President Kennedy. It's interesting, this emphasis on continuity, because my understanding is that there are a few things that were immediately rescinded, one of which was an order that Kennedy had given to withdraw troops from Vietnam. That one was turned around immediately. And I believe there was an action in regard to our money supply and the gold standard. So there were a few things that were not at all acts of continuity. They are focused on the ones that are. While he was emphasizing continuity, the president added an emphasis of his own, his determination, as he had pledged to the joint session of Congress, to get a dollar's value for every dollar spent. He told his cabinet officers to go back and try to cut their budgets once more. He sent personal letters to 7,500 defense contractors asking their help in keeping costs down. Through it all, he displayed the same folksiness, persuasiveness, stubborn determination, and, when necessary, toughness that he had acquired as a boy on a ranch near Johnson City, Texas, and had applied through 32 years of behind-the-scenes maneuvering in Congress to become one of the most effective legislative leaders in American history. The next one is called "The Good Old Days Fed the Long Roots," and we have a lot of family photos that we will look at. So this one here, it says, "The two most important forces in Lyndon Johnson's early life were his parents. They were active, educated people who started exercising the boy's mind almost before he could walk. His mother had taught expression in the public schools." That's the literal in quotes. She had taught expression. I suppose that means speaking, maybe public speaking. And before Lyndon was 2, she taught him the alphabet. His father was a farmer, school teacher, and member of the Texas legislature. Mealtime in the Johnson home was always a lively time for talk about history, civics, and politics. Even as a schoolboy, Lyndon was a leader, and whenever his father had to attend the legislature, he left Lyndon in charge of the family and chores. The boy managed to delegate much of the wood chopping, hog slopping, and chicken feeding to 3 sisters and his brother, Sam Houston Johnson. It's interesting, Sam Houston is his little brother's name. That's a Texas name for one of the founders of Texas. Lyndon grew restless. After high school, his parents tried to talk him into college, but he was having none of it. He went to California looking for work, and not finding it, hitchhiked back to Texas, broke. He got a job on a road gang, shoveling gravel. In due course, his parents again brought up the subject of college, and this time Lyndon listened. He borrowed $75 and enrolled at a state teachers college. There, he soaked up knowledge furiously and became the star debater. To help meet expenses, he worked as a janitor at the college, practicing oratory as he swept the halls. Then, in 1931, Johnson started taking a more active interest in politics. He helped Richard Kleberg, one of the owners of the huge King Ranch, get elected to Congress, and went to Washington as Kleberg's secretary. Lyndon was on his way. Here we have his family there. It says little Lyndon and Carr. Still in curls at the age of 4, little Lyndon leaned against the radiator of the family's automobile during a Sunday picnic at the Johnson Ranch. His white-bearded grandfather is behind the wheel. Here. In wheelchair at right, her head shaded by a relative's boater, is Lyndon's grandmother. His sister Rebecca sits on the fender at left. So that's his sister. Back at the ranch before he became president. So this is President Johnson lounging with Lady Bird and daughters at the ranch in front of their rambling ranch house in Texas. There. Here at the top it says President's parents. His mother, Rebecca Baines, was the daughter of a Texas Secretary of State. So he definitely came from political ranks. And this, his father, Sam Ely Johnson, looks so much like Lyndon. That's like those photos of Lyndon that we saw as a young man in a recent episode. It says his father, Sam Ely Johnson Jr., sponsored a bill in the Texas legislature to purchase the Alamo as a state shrine. Interesting. So it still is. If you go to visit the Alamo, it's a state treasure there in San Antonio. And just as a note, if you ever go to see it, one of the overwhelming senses that you get when you walk up to it is, this is rather small. And it is. It's a small little old fort, the Alamo, that every Texan must remember and honor in our hearts. Big Lyndon and Carr, with Lady Bird up front and daughter Lucy with a seat full of dogs. Western-booted Senator Johnson rested up for the 1960 Democratic Convention by touring his ranch in a Ford convertible. So here is Lyndon and Lady Bird and their daughter Lucy with dogs touring their own ranch before the 1960 convention. So that was when it was possible he would have been the candidate. And it turns out that Kennedy got the nomination and then extended the offer of the vice presidency to Lyndon. It says all eyes are on Lyndon's ladies. And so it says, as Americans got better acquainted with their president, the president's family were having to get used to a new role. The Johnsons' 2 daughters, Linda Bird, 19, and Lucy Baines, 16, returned to school, now escorted by Secret Servicemen wherever they went, even on dates. Mrs. Johnson put all her financial holdings into a trust, as did her husband. Then she worked at answering mail and preparing to move her family and belongings into the White House. Johnson first met his future First Lady, an indefatigable helpmate, in 1934, when he returned briefly to Texas from Washington. She was Claudia Taylor then. Yeah, not Lady Bird at all. Her name is Claudia Taylor, the daughter of a wealthy rancher and businessman. But a nurse had nicknamed her Lady Bird, and the name stuck. Oh, interesting. So it was her nickname. Johnson tried to date her immediately, but she turned him down. Lyndon persisted, besieging her by telephone when he got back to Washington, and they were married 2 months later. Sometimes, said Lady Bird, Lyndon simply takes your breath away. Well, you know, it's interesting. When you look at his picture now, you don't get that. But when he was a young man, he actually looked a great deal like his father and had a very charming look about him. That's not him, that's his father. But the photo that I've seen of him as a young man, he was a handsome man. And especially if he had power and influence and knew a bunch of people and could show you a good time, I could see why that would take your breath away. Here she is. It says, First Lady at work in her bedroom at the Elms. Lady Bird tackles letters that must be answered. Then here they are at church, at St. Mark's Church in Washington. It says they are Episcopalians, but the president is a member of the Christian church. This is the daughters at home. It says Lucy Baines talks on the telephone as her older sister Linda Bird reads the family mail. And then here they are. It says daughters at school. Linda Bird here goes to classes at the University of Texas at Austin with sorority sister. And then her sister Lucy here leaves the private school she attends in Washington with a classmate. So there are those young ladies. And I'm going to keep looking, but it looks like maybe that is all we get. There's a whole article spread about his political team. Oh no, here's a photo of him with his cabinet. It says, at breakfast with congressmen, it's civil rights. So these men are sitting around talking about the Civil Rights Act. And then there at the bottom, it says, at luncheon with governors, it's the budget. So it's making the point as he goes through his meetings, he's got civil rights for breakfast, he's got the budget for lunch. And that is our look at Lyndon Johnson. I will flip through the magazine while we wrap up just to make sure we're not missing anything else about Lyndon. But let me know in the comments what you noticed. This does feel like a little bit of a puff piece, but one thing that we noted in that first mention of Lyndon after he took the presidency was we did not see Lady Bird at all. And so this one gave a whole 2-page spread to Lady Bird, Lucy Baines, and Linda Bird so that America could get to know his family. It gave a little look at his country background, his origins, and his family's familiarity with politics. It gave a light touch over of his legislative experience. And so, yeah, that's what we got about Lyndon. Definitely a full switcheroo from 1 month prior when he was the focus of the Bobby Baker scandal article, where it showed him arm around Bobby Baker, who was the central vortex of that scandal. Oh my word, y'all. There is an entire, I'm counting, it's like 6, 7, 8, 9 pages, 10 about Oppenheimer. And I'm seeing Hitler and the European scientists' exodus and the private hell of these men and the H-bomb. A whole expose about the Oppenheimer situation. Did you guys watch that recent movie? That was fascinating. But anyway, it goes on and on. I'm on page 12, 13. It's going on and on and on about Oppenheimer and his friends and his role in bringing the H-bomb to the world. Really interesting to see that alongside this. Of course, history is all happening at the same time, but that while we're looking at LBJ, we're also uncovering and discovering the importance of Oppenheimer with the H-bomb. Very fascinating. Of course, I'll just show you guys. Here is Great Smokes, it says. Taste great, smokes mild. Tons of cigarette advertisements. This is for Chesterfield King. Great, tastes great because the tobaccos are. 21 great tobaccos make 20 wonderful Chesterfield Kings. Vintage tobaccos, grown mild, aged mild, blended mild, and made to taste even milder through longer length. Oh my, They really sold us on cigarettes for many years, didn't they? Well, we get a cigarette advertisement on the back as well. Salem. That is the end of this article. That is the end of our look at life's first presidential focus on LBJ. I do have magazines from the following year, both before the election. So this is August 1964, and then the mighty landslide after he gets elected on his own right. So we will go through these at some point. Let me know if you're interested. But I want to point out to you that we, if you missed it, went through the story of Roscoe White. It was a 3-parter and very fascinating. So go back and take a look at that if you missed it. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this quick life brush over of President Johnson's life. And I hope you have a great day. Bye.